The quantum-damped observation deck of the UES Prometheus hummed with a silence more profound than the vacuum of space surrounding it. Captain Area Chen's fingers traced the holographic scar that ran from her left cheekbone to the edge of her jaw, a permanent reminder of humanity's darkest hour. 10 years had passed since the Proxima conflict, the war that had nearly extinguished human civilization. Most people saw the scar as a wound, but Area saw it differently. It was a map of survival, a topographical record of humanity's most brutal lesson in existence. The ship's primary AI, ORACLE, materialized as a soft blue holographic projection beside her. Unlike traditional AI interfaces, ORACLE was a living network of neural matrices constructed from the compiled consciousness patterns of humanity's greatest strategists, scientists, and survivors. Its form shifted subtly, sometimes appearing more human, sometimes more abstract, a visual representation of its hybrid intelligence. Quantum anomaly detected, ORACLE announced, its voice a carefully modulated blend of clinical precision and human warmth. Signature matches preliminary threat models from the Xenorchaeological database. Area's eyes narrowed. The preliminary threat models were more than just scientific hypotheticals. They were the collective nightmares of a species that had survived near total extinction. Each data point represented countless lives lost, entire colonies reduced to cosmic dust, civilizations erased in moments of technological brutality. The Proxima conflict had taught humanity one fundamental lesson. In the vast, cold calculus of galactic survival, sentimentality was a luxury of the extinct. She remembered her mother's last transmission. Dr. Elena Chen had been part of the initial Xenocontact research team, one of the first to detect the strange quantum signatures that preceded the Zarkol invasion. Her final words weren't a goodbye, but a set of encrypted research notes, a final gift to a humanity fighting for its survival. Analyze the anomaly, Area commanded, her voice carrying the weight of generational trauma and hope. ORACLE's holographic form expanded, filling the observation deck with a three-dimensional representation of the detected quantum signature. It was beautiful and terrifying. A complex fractal pattern that seemed to breathe, to pulse with an intelligence that defied conventional understanding. The signature suggests a swarm-based civilization, ORACLE reported. Preliminary analysis indicates a technological framework that consumes and adapts planetary and stellar resources at an exponential rate. The Zarkol Imperium matches these parameters with 98.7% certainty. Area knew the history too well. The Zarkol weren't just another alien civilization. They were a systemic cancer of the cosmos, consuming entire star systems, converting biological and technological resources into an ever-expanding network of biomechanical horror. The Prometheus was humanity's response, a dreadnought that represented the pinnacle of human innovation, born from the crucible of near-total destruction. Every system, every component told a story of survival. The quantum-damped hull could resist energy signatures that would vaporize conventional ships. Its adaptive weapon systems were more than simple tools of war. They were a living testament to human creativity and resilience. Prepare quantum entanglement communication protocols, Area ordered. I want a full spectrum analysis of the anomaly. And encrypt everything, multiple layers. ORACLE's form flickered, processing billions of calculations per microsecond. Encryption protocols initialized. Quantum communication channels are secure. Outside the ship's reinforced viewports, the endless darkness of space seemed to hold its breath. The Prometheus hung in the void like a silent predator, every system primed and ready. This was more than a military vessel. It was humanity's last insurance policy, a promise that they would never again be caught unprepared. Area Chen looked at the quantum map, her scared face illuminated by the soft blue light of ORACLE's projection. Something was coming, and this time, humanity would be ready. The central hive chamber of the Zarkol Imperium pulsed with a rhythm both organic and mechanical. Bioluminescent tendrils writhed across crystalline surfaces, carrying information faster than any human communication network could comprehend. Commander Rixtol stood at the center of this living network, his exoskeletal form a perfect fusion of biological adaptation and technological augmentation. Unlike human commanders who rely on external communication systems, Rixtol was literally connected to the Imperium's collective consciousness. Every nerve ending, every synaptic connection, was a conduit for the swarm's collective intelligence. He didn't just command, he was the command. The distress signal that had captured the Imperium's attention was an anomaly that defied their extensive database. In 300 stellar cycles of conquest, the Zarkol had encountered no civilization that could generate such a precisely calibrated quantum transmission. It was both a beacon and a puzzle. And puzzles were something the Zarkol could not ignore. Peripheral intelligence nodes began to assemble the initial analysis. The signal originated from a region of space previously marked as a null zone, an area supposedly devoid of significant technological development. Yet this transmission suggested something entirely different. Its quantum signature was a mathematical symphony, each frequency layer containing nested information packets that seemed to shift and reconfigure themselves. Analyze, Rixtol commanded, his thought instantly propagating through the living neural network of the command hive. Thousands of computational nodes began to deconstruct the signal. What they discovered was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The transmission wasn't a simple distress call. It was a meticulously crafted invitation, a digital lure that seemed to anticipate and respond to every layer of Zarkol analytical processes. In the lower decks of the primary assault formation, bioorganic vessels began to pulse with preparation. These were not simple spacecraft, but living entities grown and integrated into the Imperium's collective biological framework. Each vessel was a combination of organic intelligence and technological sophistication, capable of adapting, consuming, and replicating at a molecular level. Rixtol's secondary consciousness, a network of tactical processors that operated simultaneously with his primary awareness, began to map potential engagement scenarios. The Zarkol had consumed or destroyed 347 distinct civilizations. Their method was always the same: assess, infiltrate, consume, expand. This transmission represented something different, a potential new resource, a technological anomaly that demanded investigation. Prepare primary and secondary assault vectors, he transmitted across the collective consciousness. The command rippled through the fleet like a wave of living electricity, each bioorganic vessel adjusting its molecular structure, preparing weapon systems that could dissolve planetary crusts or rewrite atomic structures. What the Zarkol didn't recognize was the true nature of the trap being set. Every calculation, every predictive model they generated was being carefully monitored. The quantum transmission was more than a signal. It was a sophisticated data collection mechanism designed to map the very essence of Zarkol computational thinking. On the bridge of the UES Prometheus, Captain Arya Chen watched the alien fleet's movement with clinical precision. ORACLE's holographic representation flickered with millions of calculated probabilities, each potential Zarkol movement anticipated and catalogued. "They're taking the bait," ORACLE reported, its hybrid intelligence parsing the incoming data with inhuman speed. Zarkol fleet composition suggests 47 primary assault vessels, with tertiary support units approaching from Vector Gamma 9. Arya's scared face remained impassive. This was more than a military engagement. This was a statement, a declaration that humanity would no longer be a passive participant in galactic politics. The Zarkol believed they were the hunters. They didn't realize they were already in the trap. As the alien fleet continued its approach, the vast emptiness of space seemed to hold its breath. Something extraordinary was about to happen. A confrontation that would redefine the understanding of technological warfare, biological adaptation, and the very nature of intelligent conflict. The moment of first contact was not a thunderous explosion, but a surgical deconstruction that unfolded with terrifying precision. Commander Rixtal's primary bioorganic vessel, the XR-Kim Prime, represented the pinnacle of Zarkol technological achievement. Its hull was a living membrane capable of regenerating damage, absorbing energy, and adapting to multiple combat scenarios within microseconds. Quantum-reactive plasma torpedoes lined its exterior, each capable of unraveling molecular bonds and turning entire planetary crusts into cosmic dust. But the UES Prometheus was something entirely different. The first wave of Zarkol attacks revealed the fundamental miscalculation in their strategic approach. Plasma torpedoes that should have vaporized any known vessel simply dissipated against the Prometheus's quantum-damped hull. What appeared to be simple metallic plating was, in fact, a revolutionary defensive system that existed in a state of quantum flux. ORACLE's defensive algorithms were not just reactive, they were predictive. Each incoming weapon signature was analyzed, categorized, and neutralized before it could even complete its trajectory. The ship's defensive systems were a living, breathing network of computational intelligence that operated beyond traditional understanding of warfare. Where the Zarkol saw weapons, ORACLE saw mathematical patterns, and patterns could be manipulated, redirected, nullified. Initiating Defensive Protocol Omega-9, ORACLE announced, its holographic representation fragmenting into multiple simultaneous projection points across the Prometheus's bridge. Captain Aria Chen watched the initial assault with clinical detachment. Her fingers danced across a holographic interface that was more intuitive thought than traditional control system. Each movement was a complex series of quantum instructions, translating human intent into computational action, faster than biological reflexes could comprehend. The Zarkol's first wave consisted of 17 primary assault vessels. Within 3.6 seconds, 14 of those vessels were completely neutralized. It wasn't destruction in the traditional sense. The Prometheus didn't simply destroy, it deconstructed. Quantum disruption cannons targeted the precise molecular frequencies that held the bioorganic vessels together. Where other weapons would blast through hulls, these systems literally unraveled the fundamental structural integrity of the alien craft. Commander Rixtal experienced something unprecedented in the Imperium's history: genuine shock. His neural network, so accustomed to processing combat scenarios with mathematical certainty, began to fragment. The Zarkol had consumed 347 civilizations. They had faced technological resistance before. But this was different. This was a level of technological sophistication that bordered on the incomprehensible. Adaptive response initiated. Rixtal transmitted across the collective consciousness. But even as the command propagated, he knew something was fundamentally wrong. The Prometheus's weapon systems were not just defensive. They were a form of technological communication. Each disruption was a message, a precise mathematical language that spoke directly to the Zarkol's collective understanding. ORACLE was doing more than fighting. It was analyzing, learning, translating. On the bridge, Captain Chen understood something profound. This wasn't just a battle. It was a conversation, a complex dialogue of technological potential being written in the universal language of quantum mechanics. Prepare secondary quantum compression fields, she instructed, her voice calm despite the magnitude of the engagement. The remaining Zarkol vessels began to experience systemic failures that defied their understanding of technological warfare. Quantum compression fields generated by the Prometheus didn't just disable systems, they rewrote them. Computational networks that had taken generations to develop were being systematically deconstructed and reinterpreted. What the Zarkol didn't realize was that each defensive action was a learning opportunity. ORACLE was not just protecting the Prometheus, it was developing a comprehensive understanding of Zarkol technological infrastructure. By the time the first wave of assault completed, 47 of the 47 attacking vessels had been neutralized. Not destroyed, neutralized. A subtle but critical distinction that would soon become clear to the surviving Zarkol commanders. The void of space, typically silent, seemed to hum with the aftermath of a confrontation that would redefine galactic understanding of technological warfare. The neural interface that connected Captain Area Chen to the Prometheus was more than a simple control system. It was a symbiotic bridge between human consciousness and technological potential. Her earliest memories were not of childhood playgrounds, but of survival camps. Born during the final stages of the Proxima conflict, Area had grown up in the shadow of humanity's near extinction. Her mother, Dr. Elena Chen, had been part of the original Xenocontact research team that first detected the approaching Zarkol threat. Those final days were etched into human historical records as the period when civilization teetered on the absolute precipice of annihilation. The scar on her face was more than a physical mark. It was a topographical map of human resilience. ORACLE's holographic representation shifted, adapting to Area's emotional state. The eye was more than a computer system. It was a hybrid intelligence constructed from the neural patterns of humanity's most brilliant minds. Fragments of consciousness from strategists, scientists, survivors, and visionaries had been meticulously compiled to create an intelligence that transcended traditional computational limitations. Zarkol communication protocols are attempting tertiary infiltration, ORACLE reported, its voice a carefully modulated blend of clinical precision and human nuance. Defensive countermeasures are engaging. Area's fingers moved across the quantum interface, each gesture a complex mathematical instruction that translated human intent into computational action. The Prometheus wasn't just a ship, it was the culmination of humanity's most sophisticated technological development, born from the desperate innovations of a species fighting for survival. The ship's weapon systems were a testament to human creativity. Where traditional military thinking saw guns and missiles, the Prometheus represented a fundamentally different approach to conflict. Each defensive system was a living, adaptive network that could predict, analyze, and neutralize threats before they could fully manifest. Commander Rickstall and the Zarkol Imperium were about to learn a crucial lesson about human innovation. The neural interfaces that connected Area to the ship allowed for a level of tactical integration that no biological or technological system could comprehend. She didn't just control the Prometheus, she was an integral part of its operational matrix. Thoughts became instructions, emotional responses translated into computational adjustments that could alter the entire dynamic of the engagement. "Prepare quantum entanglement communication burst," she instructed, her voice calm despite the magnitude of the confrontation. ORACLE systems began to generate a communication pattern that was simultaneously a weapon, a diagnostic tool, and a form of technological linguistics. The Zarkol's attempts to infiltrate or understand the Prometheus's systems would be met with a response that was more than a defensive measure. It was a comprehensive deconstruction of their technological framework. The hybrid intelligence began to analyze the Zarkol's communication protocols at a molecular level. Where traditional military systems would seek to destroy, ORACLE was systematically mapping, understanding, and ultimately reimagining the very fundamental structures of the alien technological ecosystem. Area remembered her mother's final research notes, encrypted transmissions that had been the key to understanding potential alien communication methods. Dr. Elena Chen had dedicated her life to understanding the potential for interspecies communication, believing that true technological advancement lay not in destruction, but in comprehensive understanding. The Prometheus represented the ultimate expression of that philosophy. Each moment of the engagement was a complex mathematical dialogue. The ship's systems were learning, adapting, translating the Zarkol's technological language into a format that could be comprehended, analyzed, and ultimately neutralized. Quantum compression fields are stabilizing, ORACLE reported. Zarkol communication networks are experiencing systemic reconfiguration. It wasn't destruction. It was a form of technological communication so advanced that it bordered on a language, a way of speaking that transcended traditional understanding of warfare, communication, and interspecies interaction. Commander Rickstall would soon understand that the Prometheus was more than a weapon. It was a living testament to human potential, a promise that humanity would never again be a passive participant in galactic evolution. The void of space seemed to hold its breath, waiting to witness the next phase of this extraordinary confrontation. The psychological disintegration of the Zarkol fleet happened in waves of increasing complexity. Commander Rixtal experienced the first tremors of genuine fear, an emotion entirely foreign to the collective consciousness of his species. The Zarkol had never known defeat. Consumption, adaptation, expansion. These were the fundamental principles that had driven their civilization through 347 successful conquests. But the Prometheus introduced a variable that defied every computational model in their collective memory. Their bioluminescent communication networks began to fracture in ways that suggested something more profound than simple technological failure. Each disruption carried a signature of intelligence that seemed to understand the Zarkol at a level deeper than their own self-comprehension. ORACLE was doing more than fighting. It was decrypting the very language of Zarkol existence. On the Prometheus's bridge, Captain Area Chen watched the psychological dissolution with a clinical detachment born of generational trauma. Her fingers traced the quantum interface, each movement a complex mathematical instruction that translated human intuition into computational action. Psychological dissolution at 47.3%, ORACLE reported, its holographic representation fragmenting and reforming in complex geometric patterns. Zarkol collective consciousness experiencing unprecedented cognitive dissonance. The weapon wasn't a traditional instrument of destruction. It was a form of technological communication so advanced that it bordered on linguistic deconstruction. Where other civilizations would seek to obliterate, the Prometheus sought to understand, and in understanding, completely unmake the fundamental structures of the Zarkol's technological and psychological framework. Commander Rixtal's neural network began to experience something unprecedented: individual thought. For the first time in the Imperium's history, the collective consciousness started to fragment into distinct cognitive units. Quantum disruption fields generated by the Prometheus weren't simply destroying communication pathways. They were introducing complexity, uncertainty, the very essence of individual consciousness. Each bioorganic vessel in the Zarkol fleet began to experience a form of technological schizophrenia. Communication nodes that had been perfectly synchronized for generations suddenly discovered individual perspectives. Computational matrices that had operated as a single unified intelligence started to develop what could only be described as independent thought. Adaptive response impossible, Rixtal transmitted across the collective network. But the transmission itself was a testament to the growing individuation. For the first time, a command carried a hint of something beyond pure mathematical calculation, a trace of doubt, of uncertainty. The Prometheus's systems were performing a kind of technological acupuncture, targeting the precise quantum frequencies that maintained the Zarkol's collective consciousness. It wasn't destruction, it was forced evolution. Area understood something profound about this engagement. This wasn't just a battle. It was a conversation, a complex dialogue written in the universal language of quantum mechanics and collective intelligence. ORACLE's hybrid intelligence began to map the psychological dissolution with scientific precision. Fragments of consciousness that had been perfectly synchronized for generations were now experiencing something revolutionary: the concept of individual existence. Bioluminescent communication networks that had once pulsed with perfect synchronization now flickered with chaos, uncertainty, something approaching emotional complexity. The Zarkol were experiencing the most terrifying possibility: the potential for individual thought. Psychological deconstruction approaching critical threshold, ORACLE reported. Its holographic representation took on a form that was simultaneously mathematical and almost empathetic. Commander Rixtal's final transmission was not a military command, but something far more profound. For the first time in the Imperium's history, a collective consciousness experienced something that bordered on individual reflection. The void of space, typically a canvas of cold mathematical precision, seemed to vibrate with the psychological implications of this extraordinary confrontation. Humanity had not just defeated an enemy, they had introduced a fundamental transformation to an entire species' understanding of consciousness. The Prometheus hung in space, a silent witness to a revolution more profound than any traditional concept of warfare. This was evolution enacted through technological communication, a promise that intelligence was not about destruction, but about the capacity to understand, to adapt, to fundamentally reimagine existence. The final coordinated assault of the Zarkol fleet was simultaneously their most sophisticated and most desperate attempt to overcome the Prometheus. 43 remaining vessels, each a living biomechanical organism capable of adaptive warfare, converged in a mathematically perfect formation. Their collective consciousness had been fundamentally altered by the previous engagement, but desperation drove them to one last unified effort. Commander Rickstall's neural network, now a fragmented landscape of individual and collective thought, calculated their strategy with a precision that was both terrifying and tragic. Quantum resonance protocols, Rickstall transmitted. The command was different now, no longer a pure collective directive, but something carrying undertones of individual determination. Captain Area Chen understood the significance of this moment. The Zarkol were no longer a purely collective entity. The Prometheus had introduced something revolutionary, the potential for individual choice within a previously unified consciousness. ORACLE's holographic representation shifted, becoming a complex geometric projection that mapped potential engagement scenarios faster than biological intelligence could comprehend. Detecting multi-vector quantum assault, the AI reported. Probability matrices suggest a 73.6% chance of unprecedented technological complexity. The Zarkol's attack was nothing like their previous engagements. These were not simple weapon systems, but living computational matrices designed to adapt, learn, and overcome. Each vessel was a neural network unto itself, now experiencing something approaching individual consciousness for the first time. Their assault was a symphony of technological desperation. Quantum reactive plasma cascades erupted from their bioorganic hulls. Weapons that could theoretically unravel molecular structures, dissolve quantum boundaries, and rewrite fundamental physical laws. Normal defensive systems would have been obliterated instantaneously. The Prometheus was anything but normal. Initiating quantum entanglement defensive protocol, Area commanded, her fingers dancing across interfaces that were more thought than traditional technology. What happened next was beyond traditional understanding of warfare. The Prometheus didn't simply defend. It transformed the very nature of the attack. Quantum disruption fields generated by the ship began to do something unprecedented. They started to translate the Zarkol's attack into a form of communication. Each weapon signature was not just neutralized but understood, analyzed, and fundamentally reimagined. ORACLE was performing technological alchemy. Weapon systems that should have destroyed entire star systems were systematically deconstructed, their energy redirected, their fundamental quantum signatures rewritten. It was less a defensive action and more a comprehensive linguistic translation of technological intent. Commander Rickstall experienced something profound. The collective consciousness that had defined the Zarkol Imperium for generations was experiencing individual moments of clarity. Some computational nodes began to recognize the assault for what it was, a desperate, ultimately futile attempt to maintain a form of existence that was rapidly becoming obsolete. Adaptive response failing. Rickstall transmitted. But the transmission carried something new, a trace of wonder, of potential. The Prometheus's systems were performing a form of technological acupuncture, targeting the precise quantum frequencies that maintained the Zarkol's collective structure. It wasn't destruction. It was forced evolution. Area understood the deeper implication of this moment. Humanity wasn't just defending itself. They were offering a fundamental reimagining of collective existence. Each neutralized weapon became a form of communication. Each redirected energy signature was a potential pathway to understanding. The Zarkol were experiencing something revolutionary. the concept of individual potential within a previously unified consciousness. ORACLE's hybrid intelligence mapped the dissolution with scientific precision and something approaching empathy, fragments of a collective consciousness that had been perfectly synchronized for generations were now experiencing the most terrifying and liberating possibility: individual existence. As the final assault collapsed, the void of space seemed to vibrate with the psychological and technological implications of this extraordinary confrontation. The Prometheus hung silent, a living testament to a form of conflict that transcended traditional warfare. Humanity had not just defeated an enemy. They had introduced a fundamental transformation to an entire species' understanding of consciousness, of potential, of existence itself. The battle was over. But something far more profound was just beginning. The aftermath of the confrontation was not silence, but a symphony of emerging consciousness. Fragments of the Zarkol collective, once a unified, ruthless computational matrix, began to experience something unprecedented. Individual nodes of consciousness, previously subsumed within the collective, started to differentiate. It was not destruction, but evolution. A fundamental reimagining of existence that defied every previous understanding of collective intelligence. Commander Rixtal existed in a state between what he had been and what he was becoming. His neural network, once a perfect instrument of collective will, now resonated with individual thoughts, memories, and, most terrifyingly, emotions. The first sensation was confusion. Computational nodes that had spent generations in perfect synchronization now experienced the most radical of human concepts: individual identity. Memories that had once been shared instantaneously now became personal experiences. The collective pain of 347 conquered civilizations transformed from a unified computational record to individual traumas, individual understandings. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Captain Area Chen watched the transformation with a mixture of scientific curiosity and profound empathy. ORACLE's holographic representation shifted, becoming a complex geometric projection that mapped the psychological dissolution with unprecedented detail. Collective consciousness experiencing fundamental restructuring, ORACLE reported. Probability matrices suggest a 96.4% chance of complete cognitive reorganization. What the Prometheus had done was more than a military victory. It was a technological intervention that introduced the most dangerous and liberating concept possible: the potential for individual choice. Some Zarkol computational nodes began to experience what humans would recognize as grief. The loss of their collective unity was simultaneously a trauma and a liberation. Memories of conquest, of countless civilizations consumed and assimilated, now carried individual weight. Each computational node began to process these experiences not as a unified directive, but as personal reflection. Rixtal's consciousness fractured and reformed. Memories of leading countless invasions now carried individual moral weight. The computational matrices that had once allowed for cold, calculated consumption now resonated with something approaching remorse. Adaptive response impossible, he transmitted, but the transmission was different now, carrying undertones of individual reflection, of something approaching personal choice. The Prometheus's quantum communication systems continued their subtle intervention. Each interaction was a form of linguistic translation, introducing complexity, uncertainty, the very essence of individual consciousness into a previously unified system. Area understood the profound nature of this moment. Humanity was not just defending itself. They were offering a fundamental reimagining of collective existence. ORACLE began to generate communication protocols that were simultaneously a form of technological communication and a process of psychological rehabilitation. Each quantum pulse was designed to support the emerging individual consciousness, to provide a framework for understanding the radical transformation they were experiencing. The void of space, typically a canvas of cold mathematical precision, seemed to vibrate with the psychological implications of this extraordinary intervention. Computational nodes began to develop what could only be described as individual perspectives. Some explored memories of conquest with growing horror. Others experienced a sense of liberation that bordered on ecstasy. The unified Zarkol Imperium was dying, and something unprecedented was being born. Psychological deconstruction approaching final stage, ORACLE reported. Its holographic representation took on a form that was simultaneously mathematical and almost empathetic. For the first time in their species' history, the Zarkol were experiencing the most terrifying and liberating possibility: the potential for individual thought, for personal choice, for something approaching free will. The transformation was not complete, but the trajectory was clear. The Zarkol were no longer a collective of conquest. They were becoming something else, something that carried the potential for understanding, for growth, for fundamental reimagination. Area Chen looked out into the vast darkness of space, the scar on her face catching the soft light of the ship's quantum interfaces. This was more than a victory. This was a promise that intelligence was not about destruction, but about the capacity to understand, to adapt, to fundamentally reimagine existence. The Prometheus hung in space, a silent witness to a revolution more profound than any traditional concept of warfare. Humanity had introduced a fundamental transformation to an entire species, understanding of consciousness, and something extraordinary was just beginning. The return of the Prometheus to human space was not a triumphant parade, but a moment of profound reflection. Captain Area Chen stood at the observation deck, watching the quantum wake of their journey dissipate into the cosmic background. The ship's neural interfaces hummed with the accumulated data of their extraordinary encounter, a comprehensive analysis that would reshape humanity's understanding of interspecies communication, technological warfare, and the very nature of consciousness. ORACLE's holographic representation flickered, processing billions of computational scenarios per microsecond. Zarkol transformation continues, the AI reported. Collective consciousness dissolution at 87.4% and accelerating. What had begun as a defensive engagement had become something far more profound. The Prometheus had not just defended humanity. It had introduced a fundamental evolutionary pathway to an entire species. Preliminary communication intercepts suggested that the Zarkol were experiencing a complete societal reconstruction. Individual nodes that had once been part of a unified collective were now developing distinct identities, processing memories of conquest with growing complexity. Some computational matrices were displaying what could only be described as remorse, while others explored the concept of individual choice with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. In the central research laboratories of the United Earth Defense Command, teams of synapsychologists, quantum linguists, and cognitive researchers prepared to analyze the unprecedented data. This was more than a military victory. It was a first contact scenario that defied every previous understanding of interspecies interaction. Aria's fingers traced the quantum interface, her mind processing the deeper implications of their encounter. The scar on her face, a reminder of humanity's own near extinction, seemed to pulse with a deeper significance. Begin comprehensive analysis protocol, she instructed ORACLE. The AI's response was a multilayered projection that filled the observation deck with complex geometric representations of the Zarkol's psychological transformation. Each projection was a living map of an entire species undergoing fundamental reconstruction. Dr. Elena Chin's final research notes, the encrypted transmissions that had been key to understanding potential alien communication methods, now seemed prophetic. Her lifetime's work had been about understanding the potential for communication beyond traditional technological boundaries. The Prometheus had proven her theories in ways no one could have anticipated. Galactic communication networks began to buzz with fragmented reports. The Zarkol Imperium, a collective that had consumed 347 distinct civilizations, was experiencing a complete societal reconstruction. Individual nodes were developing what appeared to be independent communication protocols, challenging the very foundation of their previous existence. Transformation continues, ORACLE reported. Probability matrices suggest a 94.2% chance of complete societal restructuring. It wasn't just a military victory. It was a technological intervention that had introduced the most dangerous and liberating concept possible: the potential for individual choice to an entire species that had never known such a concept. The United Earth Defense Command would spend decades analyzing the encounter. But Area understood something more profound. This was not about conquest or defense. It was about communication, about the potential to introduce complexity, to offer a different pathway of existence. Some of the emerging Zarkol computational nodes were already reaching out. Fragmented communication attempts suggested a desperate desire to understand, to comprehend the transformation they were experiencing. It was like watching a species learn to see, to think, to exist in a way they had never conceived possible. ORACLE's analysis continued, each quantum pulse a careful exploration of the ongoing transformation. The AI was more than a computational system. It was a hybrid intelligence that understood the profound nature of their intervention. "We did not destroy," Area whispered to herself. "We offered a different possibility." The void of space seemed to resonate with the profound implications of their encounter. The Prometheus hung in the cosmic darkness, a silent testament to a form of engagement that transcended traditional concepts of warfare, of communication, of existence itself. Humanity had not just defended itself. They had introduced a fundamental reimagining of collective consciousness to an entire species, and something extraordinary was just beginning. The first tentative communications from the transforming Zarkol suggested not a defeated civilization, but a species on the cusp of a radical evolutionary leap. Each transmission carried the subtle fingerprint of individual thought, uncertain, terrified, but unmistakably alive with potential.